Same, okay. That didn't work, Robin.
Good.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, no, just delayed.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Seattle Planning Commission meeting. My name is Vanessa Murdoch. I'm staff to the commission. We are experiencing a little bit of a late start to our meeting today as there was a last minute, the room that we had reserved was occupied by somebody else who was on the live Seattle channel. So we found a different room. We are waiting for a few more planning commissioners. Thank you all for your patience. Thank you for joining us. I will turn it over to the chair in approximately 3 minutes. And we will get started. And welcome to members of the public who are joining us in City Hall today. Thank you for coming. Yes. But yeah, I will. And you can also do minutes at the end. So. Oh, wait for David to get right. Oh. You can sit closer if the mic is on. Okay, now that we have most of our commissioners here after the room mix up, we're going to go ahead and get started. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jamie Strobel. I'm co-chair of the commission with Rick. And I'd like to start off with the land acknowledgement. So on behalf of the Seattle Planning Commission, I'd like to humbly recognize that we are gathered on Indigenous land here in City Hall and some of us virtually. These are the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, including the Duwamish, Suquamish, and Muckleshoot tribes. We thank those caretakers of this land who've lived on and continue to live here since time immemorial. We acknowledge the role that traditional Western-centric planning practices have played in harming, displacing, and attempting to erase Native communities. And we respect Indigenous rights to sovereignty and self-determination. We commit to being better listeners, learners, and to lifting up Indigenous voices, and also commit to identifying racist practices, to practice allyship, and strive to center restorative land stewardship rather than unsustainable and extractive use of the land. Announcements since we have some guests and members of the public here, welcome. We are happy to make all commission meetings open to the public. Note that we are an advisory body, so we do not hold public hearings, and we provide recommendations to elected leaders who in turn the actual decision. We encourage individuals and organizations to provide their comments appropriately directly to elected officials if you can. This meeting is hybrid meeting, so some individuals are participating remotely, through Teams. And all the rest of us are here in person. I think this is the most people we've had in person in a long time, so very excited. It's actually my first time chairing in person. So with that, we're going to move on to our color brave space norms. So we've committed to as a commission to practicing these norms. I'd like to ask a commissioner to pick one that we can highlight for today to hold in our hearts as we move forward through our discussion. Do I have any volunteers? Thank you, Rick.
Volunteer, Jenny. Look for learning and commit to learning in public. Avoid playing the devil's advocate that upholds white dominant power structures.
Thank you, Rick. Does anyone else have one they want to highlight?
I'll read one.
Thanks, Alden.
Yeah, create a space for multiple truths while prioritizing and believing lived experiences of racism.
Thank you. Both great ones for us to hold today as we move into our discussion. We have two agenda items today. One is an update on the recent round of community meetings related to the One Seattle Comprehensive Plan major update, and then a continued discussion on the comprehensive plan amendments relating to the industrial and maritime strategy. The commission will be preparing a comment letter to City Council on the amendments for consideration of the council. Moving on, we want to approve the minutes from February 23rd from our last meeting. Can I ask for a motion to approve the minutes?
David will so move.
Thank you, David. Is there a second?
Matt will second.
Thank you, Matt. Any changes or amendments to the minutes? Excellent note takers. Okay. With that, I'm going to call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Any abstentions? All right, thank you. We have our minutes to pass. Just some quick reminders of upcoming meetings. The next Land Use and Transportation Committee meeting is next Thursday, March 16th from 7:30 to 9 a.m. Then the next full commission meeting is scheduled for Thursday, March 23rd from 7:30 to 9 a.m. These meetings are both held in person and on Microsoft Teams. I'm going to pass to Vanessa for announcements.
Thank you very much, Jamie. As we are running behind, I will be very quick. Would like to remind planning commissioners to use the chat function to be recognized to speak, and that will help Jamie and I facilitate the conversation. Please do not put substantive comment in the chat, as that is not available for members of the public to see. I have not received any public comment to read at this meeting, so I will not be doing so at the end of the meeting. However, I will invite members of the public who are joining us today to offer public comment should they so choose. A reminder that we are now recording our full commission meetings and posting them via YouTube to our website. And also a reminder that these meetings are not in lieu of our meetings, which are approved at the next full commission meeting and stand as our record of this meeting.
Not in lieu of our minutes.
Not in lieu of our minutes. Thank you. That's what happens when I rush. Would like to remind commissioners to send to me your nominations for commission leadership by tomorrow. Thank you to those who have sent me your recommendations. We will take a vote on the leadership slate, or rather you all will take a vote on the leadership slate at our next meeting, which is March 23rd. Also want to bring to your attention that we have 4 positions on the commission that we will be seeking to fill. Alana, Mark, and Patience are our 3 mayoral appointments, and Rocky is our 1 city council appointment. A formal announcement of these openings will be made at the end of this week or early next week. Very sad to say goodbye to Alana, Mark, Patience, and Rocky, and want to thank them for their service, and hope at some point in the future we have an opportunity to wish them well in person. We anticipate the positions will be filled in May, and we hope that the commissioners who are stepping off are able to participate to the extent of their ability until their positions are filled. And with that, I'll ask Jamie to start a round of introductions.
And yes, thank you so much to our commissioners that are stepping off. It really takes the diversity of this body to be able to be effective, and really appreciated their contributions. So with that, we'll start with introductions. So if you can say your name, your pronouns, where you live, and if you want to say anything brief about the type of work you do, you can say that so I can start. I'm Jamie Strobel. I use she, her pronouns, and I live in the future 130th station area. And I work in climate change and environmental justice. And I will pass to Rick, my co-chair.
Thanks, Jamie. I'm Rick Moeller. I use he, him pronouns. I live between Wallingford and Green Lake in what has come to be called Tangletown. And for my day job, I'm an architect and an associate professor at the University of Washington. I will pass to Caleb.
Hi, my name is Caleb Twolde. I live in Columbia City and I work at Rainier Scholars doing leadership development work. And I will pass it to Dalton.
Hey everyone, my name is Dalton Owens. I'm a project engineer for Venture General Contracting, and I live in the Ballard neighborhood of Seattle. Oh, best Matt.
I'm Matt Hutchins. I'm an architect, use he, him pronouns. I live in West Seattle and pass it to David.
I'm David Goldberg. Use he, him pronouns. I live in Wallingford Urban Village, work for the State Department of Transportation. And I'll pass it to
Okay,
anybody.
Michaela.
Oh, hi, Michaela.
It's actually harder in person.
There's a curve to the table. You disappeared on the other side of it.
Michaela Daffrin, she, her pronouns. I live in Capitol Hill and I work in affordable housing policy and planning. And I will pass it to Rocky. Are you there with us? No? Go to Radhika. Radhika, yeah. Okay.
Hi everyone, I'm Radhika Nair. I use she, her pronouns. I live in Wedgwood in North Seattle and I'm an urban planner. And I'll pass it back to Vanessa because I can't quite tell who's here.
Let's go to Julio next. Julio, are you there? Oh, the era of virtual meetings. Let's go back to Rocky if Rocky's there.
I will jump in and introduce Rocky and Julio on their behalf. Julio Sanchez uses he, him pronouns. He is lives on Capitol Hill when he's in Seattle, spends time in Puerto Rico with his family, taking care of them, and he is interested in community engagement and works in that sphere. Rocky De Herrera uses he, him pronouns. He is a market rate developer. He lives in Finney Ridge. And with that, let's move to staff. Olivia?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Olivia Baker. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm staff to the commission. John?
Hi, everybody. I'm John Hoy. I'm staff to the commission. I use he, him pronouns.
And Robin?
Robin McGonigal, staff to the commission. I use she, her, they, them pronouns. Vanessa.
Thank you. Vanessa Murdoch, staff to the commission. I use she, her pronouns. Thank you all again for your patience as we had a bit of a later start. Back to you, Julie.
Great. With that, we're going to move to our first agenda item, which is the recent update or an update on the recent round of community meetings related to the One Seattle Comprehensive Plan major updates. So staff from the Office of Planning and Community Development have joined us to provide this update on the recent community meetings related to the updates and what is underway currently. Following the update from OPCD staff, we'll facilitate a discussion and I will ask each commissioner on the call or in this meeting for any questions of clarification. And if you do not have a question, feel free to pass and we'll circle back to you at the end of the questions portion. And for those of you in person, if you can still utilize the chat function on MS Teams, that would be appreciated. If you do not have a laptop in front of you, we can type the name in for you, just ping us. And then following the questions, then we'll begin the discussion portion where you'll put your name in and the general issue or topic of comment in the chat. We'll be monitoring the queue in the chat. So then with that, I will pass to Michael and Aja to give us their update.
Good afternoon, commissioners. Thank you very much. Let me just start by introducing myself. I'm Michael Hubner. I'm the Long Range Planning Manager in the Office of Planning and Community Development, and I am the project lead for the Comprehensive Plan Update. Aja, you want to quickly introduce yourself?
My name is Aja Hazelhoff, she, her pronouns, and I'm the Outreach and Engagement Coordinator leading up that effort for the comprehensive plan.
Great. So I'm just going to tee us up here and then turn it over to Aja because she is the one who's leading up all of our community engagement efforts. I will, in the spirit of the presentation that we're about to give, I'm thrilled and to see that the commissioners are together in a room. Many of you are in a room together live. If I had known, I would have joined the party there in person in City Hall. And it's in that spirit, probably the primary thing we want to report out to you on is a series of live in-person meetings that we had for the comprehensive plan update, which, as Aja will tell you, we think we're very successful in not going back to the way it was before necessarily, because we've learned a lot through the pandemic that we need to provide multiple ways of people to engage with a process like the comprehensive plan. Not everybody can or wants to engage in person, and we still maintain a very robust hybrid approach, mixed approach to reaching communities across the city. But it was really nice to get back in person for some more traditional looking in-person open house style small group discussion type meetings, and it was a great opportunity for members of the public to come and learn about the plan and engage with us. And that's primarily what we wanted to share with you today, is what we've been doing, what we've heard, and then a little bit about what to look forward to coming up in next phase of the project. So there might be the next slide, Aja. I don't know if there's something else I want to say before turning it over to you. Yeah, of course. No. Let me just, especially for folks, members of the public that may be tuning in or are not that familiar with the project, super quick is just to ground this in the fact that we are updating the city's comprehensive plan. This is approximately a once in a decade opportunity to re-envision what the future of the city can look like, consistent with our values and our goals, and reflective of what is important to community, what issues and challenges community is dealing with, and what the city can do collectively to address all of those. It is a big task to update the city's comprehensive plan, and it takes several years for us to incorporate all the community engagement, the analytics, our environmental review, and then a process of bringing the plan to the council for final adoption. And it's something we do under the State Growth Management Act, and all cities who are planning under the act, many cities across the state do comprehensive plans. So we are mid-course, as you can see in this timeline, in the project. We are in the phase we are called drafting the plan. And the main purpose of this phase of engagement you're going to hear about today was to share information with the public and to get input that could shape our work in drafting a draft of the plan that we're going to be releasing in the coming months. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Aja.
Thanks, Michael. So many of you have already sort of had a background in our engagement work plan and sort of our approach. I'm just going to go over a little bit of that here as a refresher. We really are centering equity through our engagement, and I'll talk about some of the ways, but this community meeting series, our main goal was to bring our engagement to community and to engage in deeper discussions about what folks envision and what their priorities are in community. So in terms of who we are looking to have conversation with as part of our engagement, you can see on the left, these are some of the main groups that we identified as being historically having not been as well represented and bearing a lot of the burdens of development, and we're looking to center those voices and to amplify them. And throughout the past year plus, we have done so through a number of strategies, the first of which has been to engage in partnerships with our community-based organization partners, each of whom serve a BIPOC community. We have also done parallel engagement that is really focused also on co-creating engagement strategies and implementing engagement work plans that are reflective of culturally appropriate methodologies and ways of having discourse. So that work that the community-based organizations did was, you can consider it a parallel work plan with 10 community liaisons that work with and are recognized leaders within 10 key BIPOC communities throughout Seattle. We've also made a lot of the engagement opportunities, as Michael was saying, available through virtual engagement in a centralized location that we call the Engagement Hub. And I'll touch a little bit more on how each of these things is going to factor into the next phases. But right now, we are here to give an update on the One Seattle Plan Community Meeting Series. So there were many of you actually that were there, and that was great to see you in person. We had 5 in-person community meetings in neighborhoods across Seattle. So you can see the areas listed there. We also offered 1 virtual citywide meeting to make sure that everyone that wasn't able to or wasn't, comfortable being in an in-person setting also had opportunities to provide input and to enter into a discussion. So at those meetings, we facilitated a mix of an open house style kind of introduction period where you can see we had materials set up and really we were focused on providing information for folks to absorb and then to inform the discussions that followed in small group discussions. So groups of about 8. And then those groups each had a facilitator and a note taker. And the facilitator helped to pose questions to the group. And then we went around in a listening circle style where every participant could provide their feedback on the given prompt. All told, we had over 500 community members participate in the meetings, which was really encouraging to see just sort of the interest that we had across the board in attending the meetings at each of these locations. We received over 3,000 comments and feedback posts. We also made it available where people could post if they didn't want to participate in the discussion, just good old Post-its on the informational boards that we had along the periphery of the meeting. So many opportunities and methodologies in terms of how you can provide your feedback, which is reflective of the larger engagement plan that we have been executing over the course of the past year. My presentation is being a little sticky, so just give me one moment to advance. So, as I said before, we facilitated the conversations by providing folks with topics that are grouped under 2 subjects, which are really focused on access to housing options and the idea of creating complete communities. And so each participant, when they entered, was given a kind of an agenda that also had all of the discussion questions. And then we made these available online and it translated in 7 different languages. So really just trying to make this available both in person and online so that this discourse could happen both in the meetings and hopefully as well as online. The 2 questions that we asked in each of these kind of larger topic headings were what kinds of housing are needed where you live? So the focus there being on what kinds of new housing, and then also where would you like to see more housing? In terms of what it would mean to create complete communities, we thought that a good approach to facilitating that would be to have folks talk about A, what you love most about your neighborhood, and B, what's missing from your neighborhood. Just to give us a sense of, what are the existing things that are really valuable and that we should work to protect in the plan, and what's missing. So what are the priority needs that folks look at the plan and see an opportunity for a positive change in their neighborhood. So like I said, we took notes, various degrees of legibility, which I found out as we were digitizing these so that we could do the analysis. We made all of the notes in the raw form like this available, as well as the cleaned up sort of data. You can see all of that on our engagement hub. I'll put a link to this where everything all these materials live into the chat when I'm done and have access to it again. And then sort of the meat of this discussion is what we heard. And Michael, did you want to jump in and just go back and forth, or would you like me to sort of dive in here?
Asha, why don't you just dive in? This gets a little bit substantive of a course, but you are as immersed in what we've been hearing from community as. So yeah, let's just have a fluid kind of a report out here, and you lead.
Great. So in terms of what types of new housing, when we did our analysis to look and see what were the trends and getting a little bit more granular about within those trends, like what specifically were people asking for across the board, unsurprisingly, folks were asking for types of housing that were more affordable, also greater variety of options, and then increased density was specifically called out, as well as more accessible ownership opportunities. So there were many different ways that people phrased this, but this was overall the real strong point that came home. We saw a lot of comments that were a little more granular in terms of what they mean by this and asking for family-oriented units specifically. So both the number of bedrooms being larger, as well as being affordable, maintaining the affordability within that. And then also to have both designs and locations in neighborhoods that are suitable to families with children, as well as multi-generational families. The idea of, or the need for social housing and community land trusts were really frequently discussed as being tools for achieving a lot of these things, and also models for how it could be structured, as well as sort of like a dual thread, which was we need more housing, but we also at the same time need to have in place anti-displacement and anti-gentrification strategies. So that was kind of almost every time that someone was talking about more housing and more affordable housing, there was an awareness of sort of kind of where that burden falls and how we can structure this growth in a way that accounts for ongoing displacement and gentrification within neighborhoods. And then lastly, there was a lot of focus on sort of housing, but connected to what? So there was a strong push for mixed use development, and within that access to retail, and retail really focusing on affordable commercial space ownership. So there was a strong thread of I want to be able to live somewhere that is also connected to my workplace. So that was an interesting thread. In terms of where folks were identifying as desirable locations for new housing, again, sweeping more housing everywhere and in all neighborhoods. And those exact phrases were used very frequently in these discussions. Getting more granular, there was a lot of discussion about how density should be spread throughout the entirety of the city, including neighborhood residential and multifamily residential areas. In terms of where this everywhere should be, I think there was also a thread that was pushing for concentrating new development in low displacement risk areas. So just sort of citing that in a more geographically specific arena. We heard a lot too about the importance of, as we're growing everywhere and in all neighborhoods, we also need to be able to maintain the existing tree canopy and our amenities that are related to green spaces. Another strong thread at the top was that housing needs to be located near transit parks and other key amenities that folks really spoke a lot more about in the next sections, as well as expanding existing urban villages and add many new smaller neighborhood anchors. And then lastly, there was about the same amount of comments that were saying that housing should be located away from arterials or very close to arterials. And so there was an internal debate about the health risks and the noise associated with having housing sited directly on roads, whereas those who are saying that housing should be located close to arterials were citing obviously the added benefit of being able to be close to transportation. So those two things were about even in the discussions.
And Aja, could I break in here? And by the excellent summary of the last two slides. Thank you very much. I did want to just to if it's not clear from the description of the events, and I know that some of the commissioners were there, but part of what I think was intended objective of having these community meetings, and is reflected in these comments as well, is that we had having a session up front in the meetings where people could learn about the plan under development, including the range of alternatives that we're studying in the EIS. So concepts like the smaller neighborhood anchors, or the idea of potentially expanding some of our urban villages, or the potential new role for neighborhood residential areas to allow a wider array of housing. Some people walked in the door already aware of some of those concepts. Some people learned about them when they got a chance to go around, look at our poster boards, talk to staff. And clearly we heard from both kinds of people who were just learning, and people who had done some of their homework before coming in, and that's great. And then when we engaged in the small groups, which is where most of the comments came from, what really came out in my experience and staff's experience is it was an opportunity for people to talk with their neighbors and other community members in reaction to those options for the city and how and where we could add housing. And it was really refreshing. I got a lot of positive feedback even from people at the time that they appreciated being able to do that. So for us, the takeaway here is people liked what they saw generally. I think we came away with some very supportive of the direction we're taking with the comprehensive plan in terms of the alternatives, especially a mixed approach to different types of strategies, and doing more than just one way to add one type of new housing, but we need it all. But also an appreciation of the fact that there's a balance between things like displacement potential and the quality of a neighborhood, such as trees, and making sure that things that people need every day are nearby. It's not just about the housing unit, it's about the whole neighborhood. And that's probably a good segue to talking about the other part of the discussion. But I just want to reflect on what I saw happening is people learning, interacting, and endorsing, but also pointing out the important things we need to figure out as we plan for these areas.
Michael, really good context. In terms of, as Michael was saying, when we asked folks, what do you love about your neighborhood? There was a lot of description about proximity to amenities, that came in the form of, parks and green spaces, grocery stores, always very high at the top of the list when we talk about amenities, access to transit, tree cover and canopy, local businesses and shops. So all of these were identified as amenities within the discussions. Walkability was another key feature of when people were describing their neighborhoods, really being able to get to what they need on an everyday basis, and having that experience feel safe and positive, and being able to connect with their neighbors, which also factored into a really prominent thread, which was third spaces for community, and third spaces being places that are not your home and are not your work, but are kind of a third space where communities can gather. So the ways that people were describing these kind of third spaces were places where you might spend money and also gather, but as well, a real importance was placed on free public gathering spaces. So plazas, car-free streets, parks, open spaces, as well as brick and mortar structures where community members can gather and be able to, express like what is, essential to them and what is important for them and their identity, as well as arts and cultural spaces as a subset of a community center. In terms of what people felt was missing from their neighborhoods, the third spaces showed up again in the form of spaces where artists and maker spaces, also green spaces, various different types of open spaces, as well as cultural and art spaces. And then a thread that came through really clearly was, again, community centers. So places where community members can gather in various different ways, as well as places where there can be a service provided. So either a private service or the city providing a service in terms of climate resilient centers, emergency response centers, health centers. So these are really things that folks identified as being kind of critical missing pieces that they would like to see in their neighborhoods in the future as we plan. Also showing up again was just the access to diverse and accessible housing options, goods and services, transportation infrastructure, and specifically bike, pedestrian, and mass transit, and then a theme generally of safety. So feeling safe and welcome in your own community, using the things that you've identified that you love, but often the feeling of public safety is being really something that was missing in terms of neighborhood cohesiveness and accessibility.
And if I could maybe reflect on those two as well. So one thing that really stood out to us in talking to folks in different neighborhoods across the city was bringing this concept of a complete community where you can get to your everyday essential needs and through an easy walk or maybe a very short bike ride, or in some cases short transit ride, but really this very local neighborhood-based discussion about as Dasha just described, that people came to this discussion living in very different types of places within the city. Many people came to the table really experiencing and appreciating that they had many of these ingredients already in the neighborhoods that they lived in. But many others came to the very same discussions, and it was great having some of the very same circles where you have people coming from very different actual realities of where they live and talking with each other that didn't have those things, didn't have sidewalks, or there wasn't an easily accessible grocery store, or really an absence of community gathering places that were accessible to them. And so that was something that really stood out from these conversations, is that in many ways we have a city of haves and have-nots in terms of the elements of complete neighborhoods. And it's different for different people, of course, but it was great to get that input. And I think it resonates with our goal of the plan, is to, through our growth strategy, through a range of other policies in the plan, to promote the availability of those things, no matter where you live across the city. So just wanted, that really stood out from these conversations.
So as Michael said, we're going to be taking this and many other aspects of what we gain through engagement and also through various other strategies to help us shape the plan, as well as the incredible amount of work that goes into the policy development that our staff are doing right now. But along with that, we also are in the process of carrying out our racial equity toolkit, which is helping us. On the right, you'll see sort of like questions that we are thinking about and answering as we are drafting the plan. So the racial equity toolkit, as Michael has been talking about, analysis of our alternative growth strategies. So thinking about how would different growth strategies affect our housing needs, as well as many of the things that the people in the meetings who attended also talked about. So sort of like, what are the trade-offs and what are the different ways that could look, and how could it serve different populations differently? We have just updated our displacement risk index, which is going to help us to answer the question of, who is at risk of displacement, and how is that going to interact with the future growth that we're looking at, as well as our equitable development monitoring program, in terms of how are we ensuring that our accountability, once the plan is released and begins to be implemented, is being carried out. And then finally, of course, all of the engagement work that we're doing is going to be factoring into and shaping the plan, thinking about how the input and priorities that we are hearing in these meetings and the various other engagement opportunities that we've been able to offer and to work with community to put forth, how are those voices shaping the plan? So these are the things that, as we are in the shaping the plan phase of our work, are really at the forefront for us. I know that this is a little bit out of pocket, but I am just so thrilled to be able to give you all a brief update to let you all know that the community-based organizations with whom we've been working over the course of the past year have completed, each of those community organizations have completed their draft their recommendations and final report outs. So we're really excited and are in the process of diving in to read everything that they've sort of synthesized and come up with and put forth as recommendations that we're going to be considering and taking this engagement input data, essentially, that they've been able to weave together in these exciting report outs and use it as a really key piece of our engagement data set that we are in the process of using and working with policy staff to inform the plan. And so we're going to be releasing these at a cadence. So we're still developing the sort of promotion and release schedule for that, as we are also at the same time diving in and really giving each of these a close read. But I just wanted to preview it for you. Look for that in late March or April. So this slide, I just wanted to, I guess it probably should come after the next one, but when I talk about using all of the engagement data to sort of be synthesized and to help policy staff write their elements as they're doing their drafting fast and furiously and very carefully at the moment, we're on the engagement side really taking advantage of this engagement hub that has worked really well in terms of creating opportunities for virtual engagement to also help us synthesize and centralize all of the data that we're collecting. So that's a really key aspect of this tool in terms of allowing us to share out data, to import data from what other folks are hearing, both our community-based organizations and all of the other stakeholders with whom we've engaged and received feedback. It's all going to be tied together, and we're going to be releasing a phase 1 through 3 engagement summary. And if anyone has a better name for what that is, essentially all of our engagement so far up until the release of the draft plan, I'd love to hear a better name, but that's what we're tentatively calling it. We're also going to...
I'm making a managerial decision that we're going to change that name. I'm just saying right now. I just putting it out there, full transparency. That's not going to be the name.
Great. Well, I thank you for that support, and I'll continue to solicit ideas. So we're going to be featuring all of this on the plan, and then also something to look forward to is that we are going to be releasing the draft plan in the spring of this year, and we're really excited to be exploring a new tool on the engagement hub for facilitating more interactive commenting, because we know that the plan is very long and super dense, and we want to try to make it as a document more accessible in terms of being able to read it, to understand how we use engagement, feedback, and input from community to inform the plan, and also just to be able to comment in a way that doesn't require you to read 500 pages, but still in a substantive way. So we're really excited.
It's not going to be 500 pages. I just for further, but it could be 150.
Okay, so 150
still a lot of
pages.
yeah.
Still a big lift. So just a preview, another preview, just that I'm clearly excited about in terms of that.
Aisha, I wonder if you could say, I'm sorry to interrupt. No, this is I wonder if you could briefly describe what commissioners might expect, what the public might expect that in terms of being able to search and comment in a more targeted way right on the document itself, which is, I think, is what you're talking about in terms of the new tool.
Yes. So I guess it's helpful to think about sort of the baseline for what we have been able to do previously is to release a PDF of that document, whether it's 500 or 150 pages. It still is kind of like there's the document, and then we can ask targeted questions, or we can, sort of provide multiple things that people can respond to. But in terms of being able to comment and navigate, and as Michael was saying, search, you kind of already have to know what keywords you're searching for to be able to make sense of it. And really the only navigation tool that's built into a PDF is the table of contents. So this new tool that we are integrating onto the engagement hub is going to increase sort of the searchability. It will allow us to, I guess I'm going to say a word, Michael, that you're not going to like, something like an executive summary, or a guide for people to be able to sort of more tangibly understand what this document, this draft plan is, as well as feature call outs. So, we'll be able to take stories from engagement, narratives from engagement, perspectives that we gain from engagement, feature those within the draft plan without it being in the draft plan. So help people make those connections. And then as well as being able to comment, we will help to structure like where the comments are going to be within the plan, as well as just being able to, just as you would if you were in a group trying to group edit a PDF, you can leave a comment. And we're still scaffolding out sort of how that's going to be structured as we're exploring this new tool. But I think it's going to make the actual document of the draft plan much more accessible, digestible, and the process of commenting to help us refine the plan over the next 3 to 4 months after the plan is released is going to be a lot more fruitful for both us and also for community. And you should look for that at the same time. We hope to have it online by the time that the draft plan is released. And then Michael, do you want to take us home with this?
Sure. Yeah, just super brief. I want to make, open up for questions or conversation. Just looking, I mean, to be total transparency here, what we're anticipating the next phase of engagement is, we're a little bit radio quiet right now as we're doing the work to put the drafts out, focusing on documenting what we've heard so far. But June, July of this week, and we'll have more precise dates as we near the release date. But in that time frame, there'll be a formal public comment period for the draft EIS. There'll be the major portion of the comment period on the draft plan. We're going to want to get out into the public and tell people what is in those documents in a way that's understandable. And so we're thinking about and developing, and we haven't finalized, what are all the modes of engagement we're going to use? Exactly who are we going to be meeting with? That's something we're doing now, is having that, so we can hit the ground running in June, but so we don't have all those pieces together yet, but just a little preview is we've built these great relationships with our community-based organizations, for example, is seeking to continue to engage with them in ways that are easy for them and build on the work that they've done in their communities. That's number one, as well as, I'll just say, just generally, other stakeholders that we have reached out to during the course of the plan, and for us to follow up and meet them where they are, bring digested information about what's in the draft plan, and more opportunities for those smaller format interactive conversations for people to be able to really plug into meaningful feedback. Second bullet I covered. Third bullet I covered that as well. Community dialogues is really where we're talking about the going out and meeting with community groups, as well as being present at community events over the summer. Summer's a great time to be out there in the public. I think you can expect to see a more in-person public face of OPCD this summer than last summer. We tried last summer. We're still in a transition away from doing mostly online to in-person. We're going to do more of that this summer and calendar that ahead of time, as well as coordinate a little bit more closely with Department of Transportation, SDOT, as they are also releasing the Seattle Transportation Plan at the same time we're releasing our plan. You're going to see us together in more places at more events. Not every event, not every place, really trying to be strategic about that, but more of that coordination so people understand the connection between what the city's trying to do in the arenas of land use and housing and community development and transportation, and that linkage is clearer, and that where people can talk to us as the city unified. And then finally, looking forward to the zoning implementation. The next phase after this summer, the next time you're going to see us out in the public is when we are starting to bring zoning proposals to community in neighborhood residential or other areas to implement the growth strategy. We don't have an exact timing for that yet. It could be as early as the end of this calendar year. Could start early in 2024. We're still working on that project schedule for the engagement, how we want to carry that out. But it'll be the idea is to be very significant. People are going to really care about zoning changes. It really is where the growth strategy becomes more real, more geographically specific in different communities, and really taking a community-based approach to that. So in small areas throughout the city, and really focusing our efforts in that more localized way. Stay tuned on that. Right now, we're focusing on obviously the release of the draft this year. That's my spiel. Just my next steps. Questions, comments, discussion. I don't know how you wanted to use your time best at this point, Vanessa, but that's our presentation.
Thank you, Aja and Michael, for that overview. It's really great to get an update on everything you've been hearing and kind of the key themes that are coming out. For commissioners, we're going to kind of go around, as I mentioned, and see if you have any questions for Aja and Michael. If you have any things you want to discuss, maybe we kind of hold off commentary until we're ready for the discussion portion. So we have until about 4:30 for this. I know Aja and Michael have graciously agreed to staying a little bit later since we started late. So if you have a question, please put your name in the chat. I will go around and check on people just to make sure. So I'm going to start with Julio. Do you have any questions or comments? And you can.
I'm sorry, Jamie, were you talking to me directly?
Yes, I'm going to go
right.
by name. So Julio, do you have any questions or you can pass?
I do have a couple questions in this new format. I'm not exactly sure which questions are appropriate now. Can you please remind me which are the appropriate questions to ask at this time?
Any clarifying questions?
Very well. Okay, I'm just going to ask my question and then it can be placed in the right spot. I hear.
Oh, you just went back on mute.
I know. So I saw an impressive effort to conduct diverse outreach, and I commend you for that. I read the groups and the spaces in which you had done outreach, and the way I interpret the information that was presented, and this is a good time to correct me if my interpretation was wrong, is that there were perhaps few opportunities to specifically engage with the African American community and the Latino community. I'm going to ask if that is correct, and if not, for you to perhaps clarify it or enrich a little bit your presentation, specifically about outreach done within the African American and Latino community. So that's one question. The other question is, not surprisingly, the conversations that you had elicited the idea of housing in areas for low risk of displacement. I'm wondering if through the conversations, the communities that you engage with were able to identify which might be or where are those low risk of displacement areas in Seattle. So thank you.
Aja, why don't you take the first and I'll take the second question.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So regarding our outreach to the
Oh, no, frozen.
You
There we
froze
go,
for a
you're
second, Aja. You're back.
Oh, am I back?
Yes.
Okay. So those were two of the priority communities that we wanted to make sure to center as part of our work. And so I wouldn't say, I don't think it's appropriate to say, well, you know, we worked with X, Y, and Z, and so we can speak for that community. I will say that we specifically worked with one of our community liaisons that helped us make really great inroads, specifically in the Central District, Rainier Valley, Othello area, and we were able to have definitely some very illuminating and meaningful discussions with the Black and Latinx community. And also those numbers are reflected on our engagement hub, which I'll just note is one of the best ways we have to get a sense of how well we're doing in terms of our engagement into those specific communities. It is self-reported in terms of we get that demographic information through registrations on the platform. But I would say that those communities continue to be priority communities in terms of both the amount of engagement that we're doing and how we're centering those voices. And as Michael was saying, I think that the community dialogues that we're going to be having this summer, we're really looking to leaders in those communities to help inform us about ways that building on the work we did with the community-based organizations and also our community liaisons, ways that we can tailor our engagement to better access those communities. So both in you know, who we're talking to, but also how we're talking to them, how those events are structured. And I think that this is really an opportunity this summer to really hone in on some of those target populations that continue to be challenging in terms of our ability to connect with those communities. But I think that given the work of, you know, specifically one of our community-based organizations, Estelida's Library, and that community liaison, I think that we've done a great job of improving our ability to connect with and to hear from both of those communities, although that does continue to be a sticking point in terms of where do we want to be at the completion of this process.
Yeah, and if I could, I'll just add. Oh, I'm sorry.
Let me just say thank you for responding to the question, and particularly thank you for highlighting the work with the community liaisons. It kind of like one of my radar, and when you mentioned it, it helped me gain more context. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Julio. I mean, I want to be really clear and transparent with the commission and also with the public is we have ambitious goals for reaching communities that have not really had an easy time to engage with the comprehensive plan in the past. It's not, and the way we're both trying to be intentional and prioritizing our resources, but also knowing that we're really just going to have to try a multiplicity of different modes and different attempts. It's not just like we try one thing, it doesn't work, and then you know, say, oh well, at all. So I think the community meetings were successful for some communities, and as the meetings went along, I think it became more well known that the meetings were happening, and we were also in different locations. And I think it was a mixed bag of success in the actual folks who attended the community meetings, and that's just the way, you know, that's how the learning process is as we're rolling out into the public kind of process. The two things, Aja, that we are committed to, and we did even as following up. Aja, do you want to say quickly about the middle housing, the other CBOs we've added to our outreach, including outreach specifically in the central area to the Black community? And I know there are other, just as an example.
Yes, I can, although they also just submitted their final report outs, and I'm going to blank right now, Michael, since you put me on the spot, I'm going to blank on the names of the groups we're working with. So maybe you can help me out.
Boy, okay. Too bad Nick isn't here. Isn't one Wanawari?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
Wanawari. And so this is kind of a late mid-year addition to our engagement work plan that another staff member has been managing with 2 community-based organizations in the Central District. The work that they have just produced, and they also just submitted their final recommendations, really centers about building and retaining generational Black wealth within the Central District. And so again, I haven't had the chance to go through and look through all of the recommendations that they posted as sort of their capstone to their work that they did with Nick over the past, I think, 5 months. But we're really excited. I think that, Michael, you bring that up also really points to one of the things that's coming through very, very strongly in reading through the recommendations and final reports from our community-based organizations is if you look at our sort of numbers about demographics with whom we're able to engage, right? Our statistic that we can point to on the engagement hub is we're at 38% self-identified BIPOC participation, which is what it is. I think that if you look at the demographic sort of makeup, the community-based organizations with whom we partnered, who they were able to connect with, it's almost an inverse pie chart, right? So in terms of who they're hearing from, they were being very apologetic for talking to 23% white population, right? So I think that those numbers and who they're speaking to is really speaking volumes to the window of opportunity that we have to, through those partnerships, really hear those voices. And I think we'll be able to, again, once we've had the time to synthesize and to sort through and find out kind of the trends and really hear what the community-based organizations have to say about the work that they did, will be a better place to more substantively answer that question, Julia. And I realize that there's a second part.
Take full stock of who we've heard from, what the gaps are, and love to hear if the commission has any ideas how we can do better, of course. I'm going to quickly answer the second question because I know there are other commissioners. Number one, we had a map of the new displacement risk analysis up at the community meetings. People could see the map. They could see where we had identified high displacement risk areas versus low. That was number one. I had an opportunity to talk to staff about those maps. Number two is, I would say, people who were living in community, who came to our meetings, who lived in communities where displacement is a significant issue, let us know that. I mean, we certainly knew people were not shy about saying we're getting displaced. So at least on that end, and that's most significant to me, that was part of the dialogue. So.
Okay, looks like we have some folks that are passing, so I'll go to Michaela next.
All right. Thank you, guys. I'm always good for a question. I love this topic. It's very fantastic to see y'all putting a lot of time and energy into this when for a long period of time. I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about not just about how you're centering voices in soliciting input, but if you have any methods or strategies for prioritizing the input from the disproportionately impacted communities that you're hearing from. I know we're all really good about trying to get to communities and hear their input, but I'm curious how you're going to kind of wait or prioritize those voices of the folks you don't normally hear from. And if you have any methods or strategies or ideas for how you're going to show that through line of accountability from what you hear from those communities into the comprehensive plan itself.
Aja, maybe I'll start with.
Something that made very clear. Let me know if you need
No, it's a great question, and I'll start with that, Aja. We really love to hear your thoughts too. I'll say first off, this is more a matter of, I hate this phrase in a way, more art than science in a way. I mean, there isn't nor are we seeking to have a quantitative weighting of, certain input gets, times 2 versus other input. And that's not the way we're approaching things. I would say first and foremost, the fact that we have the RET, the Racial Equity Toolkit framework to work within, I think guides us to leading with taking in the input we've gotten so far and then articulating, here are the outcomes from the planning process we think would show that. I think that's a really important tool to connect and to elevate input that helps to enrich that sort of outcomes way of thinking. That's number one. Number two is, I mean, just we're very trying to be, and please, commission input for us to do better if we need to, is to recognize and elevate as we are reporting out from all of our community engagement phases, very explicitly what we are hearing from communities of color, low income, other historically disenfranchised communities. And just to be really clear about that, we started by listing, here are the folks we want to hear from more. And then reporting out is to the extent we can break out, like, well, what did those communities say, is to do that, be really clear about it, and to lead with that. So we're trying to do that. And then when we are writing our own policy work, is ask the question, are those voices, those concerns, those interests represented in the policies we're working on? So yeah, that's kind of the framework. Hopefully that's successful in doing things differently than have been done in historically. It's not going to be perfect, but that's how we're going about it. Aja, you're dealing with a lot of the input and sorting through the very granular input. Is there anything you want to add that maybe is a little bit more science than art that I missed?
Well, yeah, actually, I think that Michael's being a little bit modest. I think it takes a lot of like project management leadership in order to ensure that the connection points between myself and other people on the communications team and the people who are tasked with writing the policy are in communication and in lockstep. And that means carving out space and time for me to say, hey, these are the priority groups that we are hearing from, who are, these are the voices that we are seeking to center. And so it comes down to sort of like, how much time do you have to go through and read through and to have those on your mind, and to have, you know, the tools that you need to connect the policy that you're writing to what you're hearing from community. That is, I think, what Michael's talking about is being more of an art than a science, but you can reduce it down to the like prioritization within the framework of the project that Michael's leading. So I think that when we say it's a priority and we say that we're centering equity, it comes down to sort of how much priority is being placed on, you know, the weight of the engagement data, and within that, who are we hearing from the most and who are we centering the most in terms of that process of integration into the plan itself.
Were you gonna say something?
Well, I'm trying to hold myself back because now I have an idea, and that's.
we like ideas.
We're all ears.
You're advising us, Michaela.
I'll go to Dalton next, and then I think David, other people I think all passed.
Okay, yeah, I'll hop in. I guess first and foremost, I really did appreciate y'all choosing different locations for the engagement opportunities. That was really cool to see. Interacting as like a person from the public, I felt like I had a lot of opportunities to go and check things out that were close to my home. I also really enjoyed the online practices. I think I voiced this in an earlier meeting, but just being a younger person makes it a lot easier to just interact with it on my phone. I've seen that also from peers. I guess in terms of question, I guess it would be a clarifying question. I know at the end of the presentation, y'all mentioned with the summer coming up, having hopes of being at more community events and having more of like a public presence. I'm curious as to whether you guys were, I guess, alluding to more events put on by like OPCD and SDOT, or I guess making an appearance at, you know, already set events by like community organizations. And just, yeah, having like, I guess, a smaller presence, but obviously still being there at someone else's event.
I'm going to jump on that, Michael. Thanks for that question. And yes, we were alluding to it mostly because the programming for the summer or engagement work plan for the rest of the year following the release of the draft plan, we're really looking to take what were the takeaways from the community meeting series, which went really well. I think that it was like we wanted to be there longer, and I think that from our work with community-based organizations, we've really learned that asking to be invited, asking to co-host, asking what would be an awesome event that would resonate with this community that you already have going on. How can we like facilitate that and like make this part of our work plan, meaning that we can staff and resource and help you staff and resource that dialogue with a community-based organization. Specifically, when we have the complete analysis, we'll be able to see sort of like, all right, here's what we did that was awesome for engagement so far. Here's where we still need to hear from more people from these communities. Those then become our priority sort of outreach in terms of we want to be co-creating, we want to be co-hosting, we want to be invited into those spaces to really have the field be that this is community, this is a plan that has the potential to really make a huge change in this community. And how can we have an event, an engagement opportunity that doesn't necessarily feel like the city needs to hear from you again about this thing. Like it's that education, and it's also the touch point for engagement, and we're really looking to community. So that's why it sounds like something we have to allude to, because we're in the process of looking at what relationships do we have in community, and we are working closely with SDOT in terms of leveraging, we're doing very similar engagement work at the same time. So what are opportunities where we can have a unified message in terms of, we really would love your help refining these two plans. These are some of the ways that they're linked, and having that as an opportunity to also talk about how we're working to not be siloized departments and have plans that are out of sync, but rather in coordination. So the short answer is like, we're really looking to community and to our relationships and building those relationships, both with existing groups that we've already worked with, as well as new groups that we're excited to make contact with and develop those relationships.
All right, David.
Yeah, Audrey, you kind of anticipated my question, which had to do with how you are interacting with, integrating with the outreach that SDOT's doing at the same time. I want to say as a preface that, this commission went on the record advocating for more resources for you all to do the kind of engagement that you're doing. And it's really gratifying to see the kind of creativity and the extra effort that's going into this. It looks a little different from comprehensive plan outreach efforts of the past, and so that's something to be proud of. But if you could say a little bit more about how the transportation plan outreach and engagement and yours are integrated, it would be great.
I'll jump in on that, Aja, because I want to be, like as I mentioned before, the engagement program, if you will, the calendaring of events, exactly, what that's going to look like in June, July is a work in progress now. I don't want to go too far into like guessing what it might be. I can tell you that the kinds of things that we think could work well is like joint open house opportunities, joint appearances at standing, meetings of organizations. If it's a community event like a fair or outdoor, being there together side by side with materials that speak to each other and not just like parallel departments out there in the public, but like we're actually thinking about how we're communicating the two plans together. Yeah, things like that is what we're aiming for.
Interested.
Yeah.
Had you muted, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was muted and then I was talking.
Yeah,
I guess I was interested in the process, but also what you're finding, what SDOT's hearing, what you're hearing, how do they go together? How do they not go together? How will you reconcile them, down the line?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. No, that's another angle on this. Well, number one, we're sharing engagement input first of all. what they've heard, they're giving us. What we've heard, there's related to the STP plan, we're sharing with them. That's number one. Number two is just in terms of the plans themselves. We're going through a process now of continuing to sync up and reconcile the two plans as well as we can. We release a draft that the plans themselves speak to each other, that our growth strategy is supported by the transportation investments. It is built around what we know about what future investments may be. Specifically, transit is going to be huge, but others as well. Needs for sidewalks and safe ways to walk and bike around our community centers and anchors. And then being really clear about that when we go out into the public is how they work together, because 15-minute complete neighborhood is only as good as the stuff that's nearby and the ability to get there. And that's where their work and our work as two departments go hand in hand. So, yeah. Aja, did I miss anything there on sharing information, especially?
I mean, I think that our work with the community-based organizations, we actually had shared different contracts, but with the same community-based organization for a number of our CBOs that we worked with. So that is I know is really important to SDOT. And so it's really just helped us to synthesize that aspect of the work, but as well as the larger engagement data set. Not to keep bragging on the engagement hub, but the engagement hub has made it really possible for us to seamlessly take all of that data, help point to the analysis that we did, but also give it to other departments in a raw form in a way that I think is kind of unparalleled in terms of just not having 1,000 different spreadsheets. So in terms of just that kind of nitty gritty, the physical, actual digital sharing of information from the raw perspective has been great. And then just a number of coordination meetings around sort of the reading through, close reading, and also trend analysis and stakeholder analysis of who we're hearing from. SDOT has been a great partner in helping us to sort of answer those questions as well in terms of the larger engagement data set.
Thanks, Aja. I think we have two more questions and then we'll let you go after that if you can stay just a couple more minutes. I'll go to me and then Rick, if that's okay. So I heard you mention that there was an updated displacement risk index and I'd love to see it. So if you can share that for this, and then for commissioners, we are going to be getting a briefing on that from Diana Canzaneri, right? On the 23rd. So just as a heads up, I would love to kind of hear a little bit about how, since anti-displacement seemed to come up a lot in the themes you were talking about, if you have any initial thoughts about how you might be incorporating that in, is it going to be throughout the comprehensive plan, or are you planning to pull it out separately? How are you currently thinking about that?
Let me see if I'm going to quickly tick off some responses to those. So first of all, just a couple of factual corrections on the first part, just so you have a clear view of what's coming. We have a draft updated displacement risk index. It has been shared. It was part of the meeting present materials that went with the community meetings. It's available in that form. And Aja, or we can follow up to make sure you have the right link to get to that. We will be finalizing that map, the index, in a more of a formal anti-displacement strategies report later in the process. So we're sharing that map with the public as we're working through the larger analysis, which is more than just a map, right? The map is a tool. The second thing is, I don't believe that's what Diana's coming to talk with you about on the 23rd. I think she talked to me about it today. Diana Canzaneri, demographer in our office. I think she's coming to talk about the race and social equity index, which is another really important and widely used tool at the city. So just yeah, it's all good. Making sure that you all. So happy to come back and talk about some of our anti-displacement data and analysis later, but that's a different topic. And then finally, on your question about the plan itself, we are both approaching this as anti-displacement strategies where they are a good fit across the plan elements, a more robust discussion of anti-displacement in the housing element, especially because that is called for under updated statute, state law, and that's the right place for it to exist because we're largely talking about housing displacement, although not exclusively. And then we are currently thinking that the plan itself, the final plan, will have a companion document which is more implementation focused that we would call the anti-displacement strategy. So more about actions than policies, although they would be, there'd be some overlap and some, they complement each other. But that's that's the shape of things as we're working toward right now.
Thanks, Michael. Rick.
Thanks, Jamie. And thank you, Michael and Aja. I agree with David and others that this is a creative effort to be proud of. I'm going to ask a question, and given that it's now 4:33, it's perfectly fine if your answer is, let's talk about that later, because I'm getting a little bit ahead of us. But you had noted correctly, I think, that while there's a lot of consistency in the feedback that we're getting, it's one thing to talk about these things in principle, and it's another thing to talk about them when you get to the actual zoning maps. And I'm wondering if, not if, but probably what kind of strategies you're pondering as we make the transition from talking about this as a set of principles and goals and a vision to how it's actually implemented, whether that's how you can help people visualize what this might be like or other strategies that might be on the table. And again, this could certainly be a topic for a future conversation.
I think it's a great topic for a future conversation as we get closer to the implementation phase, and I'm sure there'll be good opportunities to work with the commission on that. I can tell you just for the time being that you can expect a companion document with the draft plan in May, June this year, which is specifically intended to provide descriptions and visualizations of new infill, missing middle type housing in different contexts, different scales, different look and feel, to make it more tangible, make it more real to the community, what the city is studying through this process. Great. And we would build that kind of approach is something we could certainly build on later in the process when we actually have a better idea what the final plan may look like in terms of areas of change, and when we're actually talking about zoning is not just bringing visualization and some sort of different ways of communicating what it means to the public so we can have a good conversation.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Michael and Aja. Michaela had a really quick question of can you restate roughly when you would release the companion anti-displacement analysis? If you have a timeline on that.
This is really something to anticipate with the final plan. That said, there may be components of that we make more available on the website as we go into engagement this year. We're doing our best to stay ahead of that. We really want to link the analysis with action, and therefore being closer to the final plan is what we think is the best time to do that.
Well, thank you both so much for coming to us today, and as well as staying a little bit longer and accommodating our late start. We're really, really appreciative of that. And obviously the commission is really invested in seeing this through and supporting you all in this work, and just really exciting to see the wide variety of input that you've gotten from all over the city and many different communities. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
All right, we are slightly behind schedule, but we are going to move on to our next item, which is the discussion on the Industrial Maritime Strategy Comprehensive Plan amendments. Commission staff will lead the discussion on the proposed comprehensive plan amendments related to the Industrial Maritime Strategy, beginning with answers to questions that were raised by commissioners in our previous meetings. Following those Q&As, staff will introduce a staff draft letter for our review and comment. And as a reminder, the proposed comprehensive plan amendments are the first step in adopting and implementing the industrial maritime strategy recommendations. These amendments and regulatory changes will be considered this spring by the City Council's Land Use Committee. And the Commission's comment letter will be focused exclusively on the proposed comprehensive plan amendments. We are not commenting on the specifics of the industrial maritime strategy itself. The stakeholder advisory group's recommendations were documented in a final report and studied in both a draft and final EIS. And will provide an overview of the proposed comprehensive plan amendments related to the industrial maritime strategy to be considered by the City Council this spring. This is the second of 4 meetings where we will discuss this and develop and approve a comment letter on the proposed amendments. So just keeping that in mind in our timeline. John is going to do a presentation, and after that, I will facilitate the discussion by first doing a call for clarifying questions and then opening the floor. We'll have about till 5:20-ish for this, because we do have members of the public who are going to be providing public comment at the end. So we'll make sure we have enough time for that. With that, I will pass over to John.
Thanks, Jamie. You just said a lot of things that I was going to say, so that's helpful in terms of cutting down presentation a little bit. Olivia, you're going to manage slides, so why don't you just go ahead and I'll just say next. Just really quickly in terms of timeline, we had a preliminary discussion around the comprehensive plan amendments related to the industrial maritime strategy. At the last full commission meeting, several comments and questions were raised that I will review answers to today. I will also, depending on how much time we have, I can introduce some of the content of the staff draft letter. I will send a staff draft letter out tomorrow, so you will have time to really sink your teeth into that, because I don't think we'll have time to really get into the details of it today. But at the next full commission meeting, we will provide opportunities to discuss that letter. And actually, I'm going to ask for your input on this staff draft letter. And so I will provide an overview of a revised draft letter in 2 weeks. And then at the April 13th full commission meeting, we will take action on our final draft letter. It will be important to take action at that point so that we can send our recommendations on to the City Council, as they are tentatively, as of now, scheduled to have the first of what will most likely be a few meetings focused on those comprehensive plan amendments on April 24th. Next. So just as a reminder where you can find the proposed amendments, it's really not easy for me to send them out to you because of all the track changes, and I really would guide you to look at the appendices of the final EIS. And I've sent that to you several times in email, and the link is there on the screen. You can find the text of all the individual proposed amendments there. They are in strike through, underline, and I will highlight a few of them today for the discussion. Next, Jamie already said this, just as a reminder, we really want to focus on the proposed comprehensive plan amendments. At this point in the process, we're not getting into the details of the actual industrial maritime strategy itself. However, you will notice that I have incorporated some longstanding themes and comments that will be carried over into the staff draft letter that maybe were not addressed specifically in the comprehensive plan amendments themselves. Next. Just as a reminder, most of the proposed amendments that we have seen are in the land use element. There are a few minor edits in the container port element, and then the shoreline areas element is referenced also. So the majority of the letter will be on those land use element policies, but I have incorporated some additional themes for consideration. Next. So Vanessa and I felt it was important to revisit the questions and comments that were raised at the last full commission meeting. There were several comments that would be germane to the draft letter to eliminate any confusion or to eliminate any kind of wordsmithing. So we wanted to go through some of the details of the comments and responses to those. I did send those out in advance. Hopefully you've had the chance to look at some of those, but I will go through quickly and we will have a brief opportunity for any additional clarification. So let's go through those. So this is just really a brief one. What is the role of the Planning Commission in reviewing these comp plan amendments? So just to be clear, the primary purpose is really just to offer suggestions on the language of the proposed amendments. We're not revisiting the FEIS or the preferred alternative itself. There was a question whether there are any regulatory changes being proposed along with these amendments. We met with OPCD staff just to check in on the process. OPCD will be proposing 2 ordinances in addition to the comprehensive plan amendments that will be considered this spring. These ordinances include establishment of the new industrial zones that we've been discussing, as well as selected rezones of industrial zone land to implement the strategy. Next. There was a question, was there a preferred alternative proposed? Yes, in fact, that preferred alternative is identified in the FEIS and is the basis for the recommendations. Okay. There was a question and comment on this container port element policy, which we can be really brief about. It just, in the container port element, it said discourage non-industrial land uses such as standalone as a new addition to retail and residential. There was a question, why not prohibit instead of discourage these non-industrial uses? With a comment that those areas are unwelcome for walking and biking in container port areas. And if retail uses are allowed, incentives or requirements for safety should be considered. The very brief response from OPCD was there is a need for some limited retail in those container port areas to support workers. Next slide. So then there was a more general question about discouraging retail in all industrial areas and where is that included in these amendments. I've suggested referring to comprehensive plan policies LU 10.2, that's an existing policy, as well as a revised policy that does talk about standalone retail and limiting that, as well as the proposed legislation that City Council will be seeing does propose to tighten the size of use limit and adds a new limit of 0.4 FAR so that there will be no destination retail. That would be auto-dependent retail, such as is found in Inner Bay or Ballard. Also, we need to recognize that some industrial uses do have a public-facing component. Examples would include distilleries and breweries, maker spaces, other creative spaces, etc. Next. Okay, regarding this policy, this is an existing policy 10.68 with the revision to this is about residential development in industrial zones, and this is where they added the reference to allowing residential uses potentially in urban industrial zones for dwellings targeted to workers. There was a comment that there was a concern with the existing wording such as caretaker units, with the comment that caretaker units are not defined in the industrial land use section of the comprehensive plan. The response is that caretaker units are currently allowed and are defined and limited in the zoning code. So those, and that is existing policy now for allowing caretaker units. Next slide. And then there was a concern that the proposed wording of targeted for those workers doesn't have strong boundaries. And there was a suggestion of alternative wording maybe intended for workers with restrictions imposed for those who could occupy those residential units. The response from OPCD was that proposed wording has been carefully reviewed by the city's law department. The city cannot limit housing by occupation or place of occupation. For example, the Office of Housing does use affirmative marketing for residents. An example is at the 12th Avenue Arts building, and a similar vehicle would be used for targeted outreach to local workers for those industrial supportive residences. Next slide. There was a comment that the proposed residential units will be in Ballard, Inner Bay, Soto, and Georgetown, places that are generally projecting a mix of uses with light rail and will support the proposed employment densities. So there was a comment that there's not as much concern about evolution of industrial uses resulting in impacts to future residents. Just as a reminder, the preferred alternative is adding capacity for up to 3,000 units of new housing, focusing on workforce and middle-income housing. About half of those would be located outside of the manufacturing industrial centers in new mixed-use areas like Judkins Park, Ballard, and Georgetown. The other half would be in the industrial areas, specifically in the urban industrial zones, in those buffer zones, as a conditional use with a workforce housing requirement. Next slide. There was a reference to an existing policy that used the language prohibit new residential development in industrial zones. And there was a comment to encourage OPCD to be more explicit in their language, recognizing the legacy of environmental injustice related to locating residential units in or adjacent to industrial areas that has had disproportionate impacts on low-income and BIPOC populations. There was a comment that was supportive of the positive language that is used in a new proposed goal, G12, that states develop transitions between industrial areas and adjacent neighborhoods that support healthy communities, reduce adverse environmental impacts, and minimize land use conflicts. There was a recommendation to add a new goal, a similar goal about housing in industrial zones, referencing some of those same type of language about healthy communities, reducing adverse environmental impacts, etc. So the response is the Commission's letter will recommend appropriate language similar to that above with healthy communities and reducing environmental impacts. Next. Okay. This is in a revised policy about industrial buffer zones that with new language saying consider using the urban industrial zone to provide the appropriate transition between industrial areas and adjacent residential or pedestrian-oriented commercial zones. The question was, first, why has established a buffer been struck? And then consider using added. Comment saying this sounds less prescriptive than we would recommend. And then there was concern with how the proposed amendments would affect the unique nature of existing buffer zones between industrial areas and other uses. And so just to clarify that this wording is very specific and has been reviewed by the city's law department. This basically is only adding the urban industrial zone to the existing policy language because that is a new designation for those buffer areas. It basically will replace the industrial buffer zones. However, the zoning code will have references to both for a short period of time until they are able to clean up the industrial buffer zone references and fully replace them with the urban industrial. So that's why the policy right now includes both. Next slide. There was a question, is there a goal that has been added or language that has been strengthened regarding tribal access and rights? The response from OPCD was no. Tribal issues are governed by federal regulations. However, the city has sought input from local tribes throughout this process. So there's nothing specifically in these comprehensive plan amendments. Let's pause. How about, I'll pause. Any quick additional clarifying questions or comments on those questions and responses?
Are we going in order or are we
Good question.
in this particular moment?
I know, good question. Is this, you're calling for folks to ask questions for this?
I just wanted to know if, before moving on to the staff draft letter.
Yes.
Okay, oh, yes, yes. I thought you weren't done with all of the slides. That's why I was.
No, no.
Okay,
Before moving on, Vanessa and I felt this was really important to share this information because there were enough substantive questions and issues raised at the last meeting that we wanted to make sure that commissioners all had this information.
Yeah.
And so I just want to know, are there any follow-up questions before moving on?
Okay, and also in your emails, I know this was sent within the last day or so, is the more detailed version of this that has all of the comments and responses, that some of which John went through, but some of which are in that document and not in the slides. So make sure that you take a look at that and review that. And we'll go around in the order that I put into the chat. If you want to pass, you can put pass in the chat. So let's see.
Yeah, we don't want to spend a lot of time on this. But,
Yeah, I'm looking at the chat real quick. These are clarifying questions, yeah. Rocky.
I have two clarifying, one question. Can you go back to the destination retail question and answer? You might have missed it.
Might take me a second.
I'm guessing also.
Destination retail.
Prohibition about retail.
It's residential.
It's one of the first two. There was this one, this was in container port areas, and then the next one was
This was the one in reference to Ballard.
this one.
This one. So the response is a little confusing. I just wanted to be clear that when you have an industrial use, let's just use Vanny's in Georgia as an example. If they're producing beer there, they can have almost unlimited capacity to have serve that beer to people as a retail use, as an accessory to the industrial use. And so while there is no allowance for these big destination retail uses, you can't have a very large retail type use that exists. That's in the current code and I imagine proposed. I don't think it's a negative thing necessarily, but that answer kind of makes it feel like that can't happen. Just want to be clear.
And that could be interpreted as a destination.
It certainly is a destination for a lot of folks.
Yeah, I think the intention for the word destination retail was like the Michaels in Inner Bay and Bevmo or Total Wine. It meant really like auto dependent big box stores.
Yeah, I guess my point is the code does now and it will probably continue to allow big destination places with people with a lot of cars and people and kids to go down and hang out in these areas. Not a bad thing necessarily, but just a little confusing.
Okay.
And then the last one is on the last slide. Oh, one back, sorry. Oh, I think the question was really about the word establish versus consider.
Exactly.
And the response seemed that, yeah. So curious, maybe we need a bigger response.
Vanessa, do you want to?
I'll try to answer that. Thank you. And it was helpful when John and I sat down with OPCD staff to figure this out. Basically, the industrial buffer as it exists right now is going away and is going to be replaced by a new zone. But because of the magic of how this all happens, there will be a period of about a year when the existing industrial buffer zone exists in tandem with the new zones being proposed. And so, and this is, my understanding is that the current industrial buffer zone, and Rocky, I will ask you to correct me, the current industrial buffer zone is no longer performing as one had hoped as a true buffer. So that is going away and being replaced with, I'm blanking on the name of the zone. But
Urban industrial.
Thank you. So there will be a period of time when the current zones, industrial zones, will coexist with the new zones. And then there will be cleanup legislation in about a year to remove the old zones and have all industrial land in one of the three new zones.
So I think the
Yeah.
operative word. that
Yeah,
is
we're- yeah,
flexibility there.
yeah.
Consider.
I understand we're not answering the question.
Yeah. I think it can still say, I think it should say establish urban industrial or industrial buffer zones.
Yep.
Otherwise, it's optional and it's not gonna happen. And so if they need to retain the flexibility, tell their lawyers that the or still gives them that flexibility.
Yep.
That we're concerned about. Sorry, I'm concerned. I need to type statements here. Sorry, we're getting into this.
Yeah, I can't answer why the word consider was used specifically. I will say my understanding is all of the existing industrial buffer zones are specifically being replaced with the urban industrial zone. It is a one-for-one replacement.
Which I'm hearing that none of us have a disagreement with that. It's more that, like, consider opens the door to considering other things too, right? And so I think it's not as strong of a word as establishing or just use industrial, urban industrial or industrial buffer zones.
Yeah, and the worry here is not for industrial use, it's not for their protection, it's for the surrounding residential.
Yeah.
If they don't use these, then it's straight IG1, IG2 zones, which are heavy industrial next to residential.
Exactly. Okay, sounds like we have a point for discussion later.
Well, I mean, it's already been captured, so it'll be in the,
Okay.
that can go in the draft letter.
All right, going to David next.
Good.
Okay. Michaela. Caleb.
Yes.
Julio. Julio, do you have any questions?
Pass.
Rick.
Thanks. Quick point of clarification, Rocky. I think you referred to Manny's. I think you were actually referring to George.
George.
Manny's is one of their most popular beers.
And Manny.
That's not a clarifying question.
Quick question. There's reference in here to workforce housing. Am I correct in assuming that that's 80?
I was doing a word search and I don't see a policy that specifies the
That
upper
was
income
my
limit.
question.
Somewhere in the text of that draft, this appendix 6 or whatever that I opened up, it says at 90% of AMI, which is problematic language because that should say at, or it should include a range. But yeah, I myself could not find within the proposed land use
So
policies.
so we need to clarify what that is.
I'm sure it's in there somewhere. I just need to read it and find it. John, do you know?
No, the conversation we had was, that, Rick, are you talking about the policy that talks about caretaker units?
No, there's a specific reference to workforce housing, and I think it's even in quotes, and I just want to know how that's being defined. I've always assumed it's defined as 80 to 100%, 20% AMI, but.
I'm going back to some presentation from a long time ago when Jeff Wendland came. It was like, I thought it was like odd like 90 to 120 or something.
Yeah, I don't,
Yeah.
you know, again, I don't know if that's a comment specifically for the comp plan policy language. When we had the meeting with OPCD, he was, very clear that caretaker units, for example, the existing what's allowed now are specifically defined in code with all of the details, so that perhaps perhaps this one would be equally defined in code. So maybe it's not something to elaborate in this language. Is this the one you're talking about? About dwellings targeted to workers?
No, I
No,
thought, I thought there was a specific reference to workforce housing, but maybe
Okay.
intended for workers.
Sorry.
Anyway,
I think this is the only one that we talked about where it had housing.
okay.
It has 3,000.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, it was, there's 3 that have workforce.
Yeah, so this has nothing to do with policy language. This was just the response. This is actually, this is from this is in the preferred alternative in the Industrial Maritime Strategy FEIS, where this is described with the 3,000 broken down into the 2 separate groups.
Okay.
Where my mind went when you were reading that out loud was about half would be in industrial areas as a conditional use with a workforce housing requirement. So my mind went to, well, so who's that for?
We have those details. But that's, again, we want to be talking a comp plan amendment language.
Yeah.
That's probably not.
I was just curious about that bottom workforce word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just as a reminder, again, the portion of those housing units that are in the industrial zones are only in that urban industrial buffer zone.
Yeah, thanks.
The only other mention of workforce in the actual text is around workforce amenities, so I think that's the only.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is probably something different.
Something totally different.
So what do we have? We have about 15 minutes.
Can I just, out loud, I don't want to. I would say the devil is in the details, certainly with the code. It's not our role to fight here. I'll just, as an example, for caretakers units, in my experience, they're very rarely used by a caretaker. These are mostly rented out in the shoreline zone. These are penthouse apartments for rent by people and yachts and things like that. So, I would just, again, not our role, but hopefully our folks at SDCI are watching this stuff. And OPCD.
To that targeted language. Yeah. Okay. You show your due diligence that you did some targeting and you rent it out to someone else who's not a worker.
Right. Let's go to that.
I think the challenge is that the housing was included in the FEIS and studied, so we have to focus on the language of the amendments. Am I understanding that right?
Correct.
Totally.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself.
We know this is Rocky's favorite topic. It's okay. I had a question, John, about there was on number, I think it was, well, I'm not sure what slide it was, but there was one that didn't have a response that was specifically around the environmental justice. And injustice, like, I'm curious why that one didn't have a response, or if it was supposed to be tagged onto the next one. I think your mouse is on the slide that I'm talking about, possibly. Nope, not that one. Yes, yes, wait, hold on. Yeah, that's it. That's it. And in the document, it was one of the only ones that didn't.
Okay. The response is we will in fact do what is encouraged. And that's already in the staff draft letter.
Okay.
The response so we didn't get a response from OPCD on this. This was just,
They don't encourage us.
I don't think, I'm not sure we even shared this with them. But this is an internal note for us to recognize, and you'll see that language in the staff draft letter.
Okay. Any other clarifying questions before you move to look at the outline, which we will look this again. You'll also get this via email. So this won't be the last time that you will have a chance to weigh in on this.
Well, yeah, we're now going into the actual letter.
Yes.
And so just as a reminder, staff draft letter will be shared. I'm going to send it out tomorrow. I will create a deadline for comments, and I encourage you to provide comments. Please always remember, just send them to me. Do not reply all. And I'll set a deadline, and that's the opportunity for revisions, suggestions, comments. And we will be talking about a revised staff draft letter 2 weeks from today. So I know it's kind of hard to have a conversation about a staff draft letter you haven't seen, but we felt it was really important to go through that material that we just talked about before we get into the details of the letter. So,
John, sorry to interrupt. I'm just looking, mindful of the time. We've got a little over 10 minutes and 17 slides. So I'm going to suggest.
yeah, I wasn't going to go through them.
Okay, good. Because you're going to have to start really fast. So let's just keep an eye on the time and maybe stop, take 5 minutes to get through as many as you can, and then stop there and have Q&A, and the staff draft letter that will come to you all will not be fully baked because we haven't had the opportunity for your input.
That's why it's called a staff draft.
Well, that's what happens when you start your meeting 20 minutes late. So.
Okay, so just the way I structured the staff draft letter, this just please keep in mind, this is going to City Council as they prepare to review the proposed comp plan amendments. There will be an introduction. Similar to past letters on this topic, I've included a section up front around issues of equity and environmental justice, just to reflect our ongoing commitment to those issues and to share our thoughts on that. The land use element is where the bulk of everything we just looked at in terms of those new policies and revisions to existing policies. That's the longest section of the letter. And then just for consistency, the commission has, over the course of the entire review of this project, has had many comments on transportation, climate change, and shoreline areas and cultural resources. So I wanted to at least acknowledge, for the benefit of City Council, that these are issues that we are concerned about. We may not be seeing enough, we may not be seeing proposed language at this point, but just to share some of our past comments on those areas so that they have it all in one place. Okay. Charge ahead. I just have a couple slides just on the equity and environmental justice. Just again, this is a top of letter section just to ground us in equity. Just want to remind everybody that we want to ensure that any zoning proposals move to repair the harms of the past and benefit affected communities through both public and private investment. Implementation of the industrial maritime strategy must also consider potential displacement pressures and identify anti-displacement measures and incentives. Specifically, we support the positive tone of the language in proposed goal land use G12. And we showed this just a few minutes ago. And this is the one that says, develop transitions between industrial areas and adjacent neighborhoods that support healthy communities, reduce adverse environmental impacts, and minimize land use conflicts. So recognizing that we support this language, we also recommend incorporating similar language in a new or revised goal related to residential uses in industrial zones. getting into the land use element, this is where, and I'm not going to read these policies because we've looked at them and you will be able to read, but we strongly support the proposed policy to strengthen protections for industrial zone lands. This is the one that we've been talking about for a long time. This is the one that basically limits changes to industrial areas by removing the possibility of doing that during the annual comp plan amendment process and switching it to only updating industrial land use policies as part of the major update to the comprehensive plan. So I think everyone should feel really good about that one. So the next one is that we support the addition of the policy that would establish the three new zones: the maritime, manufacturing, logistics, industry and innovation, and urban industrial. We do get into a little bit of detail on why we support those, especially the industry and innovation and urban industrial zones, which are effectively new zones, and that we support the goal that states that support employment dense emerging industries that require greater flexibility in the range of on-site uses and activities. This is reflecting the evolution and the future of industry, something that we have wanted to get ahead of. Next slide. So let's skip through these, but there are basically three policies that establish the industry and innovation zones and describe them in more detail. So we include them in the letter and we basically acknowledge that we support them. And then similar language for establishment of the urban industrial zone. Believe me, it doesn't show up in this slide, but go back one slide. I already have language in the letter that talks about we don't like the language of consider. So duly noted. There are a few policies establishing the urban industrial. Okay, on this one, this is the policy that says consider using the urban industrial zone, which is the new zone, within or outside urban centers or villages that border a manufacturing industrial center to help provide an appropriate transition and promote complementary land use patterns between industrial and non-industrial.
I don't know if that's your spelling mistake, but or theirs.
It's theirs. Well, what
We should point it out.
Which-
Complementary, not complimentary.
no, actually, I find the wording to be problematic.
Yes.
Okay, but I wanted to point out this one that the Planning Commission has also consistently advocated for allowing maker spaces and other creative uses in non-industrial neighborhoods, urban villages, and mixed-use zones. So these types of uses do not need to be confined only to the urban industrial zone. So we recommend recognizing the potential for these types of uses in areas outside of that zone. Keep going.
How are we, is there a good pause point? We're like thematically. We have 4 minutes left.
Do you feel the need for a pause?
Do folks have any questions so far?
One question, which is if OPCD is going to change this terminology around urban centers, villages, et cetera, in the upcoming
Oh, good question.
update, and you can't change that language until the next update, are we gonna be able to nail this down? Like, that's a good point.
That's a great question, and that's something I can bring up, because the terminology change is not yet, it's just staff discussion, staff proposals, so I'm imagining it would be covered in an omnibus,
Yeah.
maybe, which is a bill that's like a cleanup bill that happens. Very much to your point, though, comp plan can only be touched once a year, so.
Well, this can only be touched during the major periodic update, right? That's the proposed policy change, is limiting it to once every 10 years.
Right, and I
Yeah.
think that's primarily focused on zone changes,
But
the land use map changes.
none of this bill can be used as on an as-needed basis? Or is it designed for this sort of problem?
It is in codes. Usually they do one once a year, but they can do them whenever.
I mean,
That's-
they're gonna have to clean up that language that deletes urban industrial or industrial buffer zone in the policy. So, you know, once they change the zoning code, they're gonna have to go back and change that policy language. So this is another example.
I imagine it could be part of the same ordinance that cleans up the code, but I don't know that.
It doesn't change the intent or allow anything new, it just literally changes.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I did want to touch on this one at least. This is another one that we have advocated for a long time. And this is to remove the existing zoning loopholes to allow significant non-industrial development within industrial zone lands. So this is saying, this is the one about, they would permit a limited amount of standalone commercial uses is the new addition. And then strictly limit the size of office and retail not associated with industrial with the new addition, except for uses eligible for the industry and innovation zone, which is that zone that would allow offices and above higher density above. Yeah.
Can we add an exclusive, I mean, you know, a self-storage explicit line in here? There shall be no self-storage. Go ahead.
It's about 5:20. Do we want to pause there?
Okay, we have like a minute or two for any questions that may have come up your office. Anybody online? I have one. Going back to the equity environmental justice.
Yeah.
Slide. I haven't quite totally, it was the very beginning.
There was one before this too.
I think that was the first one.
Oh, no, that
it.
was the
Yeah,
first one.
There's two, yeah. Can you go back one?
Yep.
I know that we had talked about this being repair arms in the past, but this is still happening. This is still an issue in terms of environmental justice. And I want to make sure that it's clear that yes, we want to repair past harms. And we also need to be considering and moving forward with things that aren't going to perpetuate those same harms. And so when I look at the next slide, like to me, this is just not, yeah, I think this is getting at some of it, but I think we need to really emphasize health impacts. So we're saying healthy communities, but I think that can be interpreted in many different ways. But like now that there's, you know, the proposed expansion of housing in industrial areas, I think strengthening the piece around considering health impacts to folks who may be residing in those neighborhoods in some way, like needs to be explicit in some way. I can think through how we might word that, but that's just, I just want to put it out there. Since this is like the first time we're looking at it.
There is a section in the staff draft letter on housing, and it talks not only about the new, what will be allowed in the urban industrial, but it also references public health, environmental impacts, contamination, et cetera.
Okay.
So please take a look at that language.
Will do. All right. With that, we have made note of where we paused in this presentation. You'll get the draft staff letter. So you can take a look at that before the next time we circle back on this. And John, you're gonna share these slides as well?
I can.
Okay.
Sure, that'd be great.
That'd be great. Sometimes I like it in chunks, so.
Also say his letter that he circulated last night, or the briefing, it was really helpful.
It actually went out a week ago.
What? Oh,
I resent it yesterday just in case it got buried.
Well, clearly, for some.
Well, that thing is very helpful whenever you think. This is the attachment, the big, the one that takes a long time to download,
Yeah.
That's chapter 6, the appendix chapter 6. So, finally. Thank you very much for
Yeah.
preparing that.
Yeah. All right, with that, we do have folks here to provide public comments, so I'll move to that. And I always have to preface this, so the commission provides time for public comment at all meetings. A reminder that we do not hold public hearings and we are an advisory body. We make recommendations to elected leaders who in turn make the actual decisions. Individuals who make comments to the commission should remember that the mayor and city council make the decisions. We encourage individuals and organizations to provide their comments appropriately to elected officials. And with that, I'm going to invite folks in the audience to offer their public comment and to please keep your comments to 2 minutes each. So,
And I'm inviting you to come into this chair because for those who are,
yeah, come join us.
that little disc right there is the microphone and they don't move because this isn't the room we usually need in. So thank you.
Great. I'm here to comment on the comprehensive plan amendment update, the big project that's happening. And I want to say firstly, I need to identify myself. My name is Gary Lee, and I am also a city planner in another jurisdiction close by, East Side. So I've been a planner for 30 years. I know what you guys are doing. I know exactly what you're talking about, and I like it. So with that, I'm for the general ideas of the update, right? Urban villages, more housing, that's great. But specifically, there's an issue with the CID. And I had emailed out the my comment, and actually there's on the page 274, there's a specific land use policy. It's downtown human services, P5. It specifically says, seek to avoid over-concentration of human service facilities in and around downtown area and encourage locations that need them where they're lacking. I have a map and a table that shows all the facilities in and around Pioneer Square. This is, if you don't think this is over-concentration, I don't know what you're thinking. So therefore, that policy has failed, or people have failed to monitor it, and it needs to be addressed in the comprehensive plan amendment, as well as be followed up with a zoning code amendment to ensure that doesn't continue to happen. So that's why I'm here, is to say you need to look at that in the update and follow up with the zoning amendment. It's already failed with the land use policy. It can actually be addressed without an update to the comprehensive plan because there's already policy, right? But hopefully it'll be also updated and addressed and taken care of when you get to the zoning amendment. So if you have any questions, and I'm representing Chinatown. I am a volunteer with the Block Watch, and I also volunteer with the Public Safety Council. So this is a big issue for us.
You should all have a copy of the letter he's referring to in your email.
You have our copies?
I'll take it.
Thank you for sitting through the meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I could be in this spot at 30.
I would say similar issues in downtown.
Yeah, Pioneer Square. Well,
And Gary, I've got it pulled up, so I don't need a copy. Thank you, though.
Anybody else? Oh, yeah, go ahead and have a seat.
So thank you for having us and allowing us to do the public comment. We really appreciate it. We just got back from Japan, so I'm a little jet lagged and I'm not sure if I'm going to make logical sense, but if I don't, let me know. My name is Casey Yanamura, and I am a resident of the CID, Chinatown International District. We moved there about 3 years ago, and we love that area. So all the things that you talked about on your planning and recommendations and everything, we have a really good cultural area that's really welcoming to all. And what I want to specify is my priority. Number one is safety and security. So you can have all these lovely things, but we are really in a pickle right now with safety and security. So we are part of the Block Watch. We walk around every Mondays and Wednesdays. And even today, we just walked around and we have people taking drugs and crime, and last night light up with emergency vehicles and everything. So I just want to express that we're a lot of seniors. I'm going to turn 65 this year, and we have a lot of elders reaching 100 years old who don't find it safe to walk out at night with their dogs or their children or anything like that. And it is due to the homeless and the city not taking care of the homeless. So we have a huge tent community, and they're coming in, they're stealing from the stores. The stores are having to get security, higher security. So then it ups our, prices of goods and services there. So that's all I really want to tell you. I'm a retired federal worker, so I know what you're going through. We've done EISs many times. I worked for the FAA and I was a regional administrator here in Seattle. So I know what you're going through and I really appreciate it. Please take these comments into place and I'll send them in as in written comments and everything. But I thank you for what you're doing and how you're planning for things for the future. Currently too, we do have a waterfront condo, and we love the improvements down there. So whatever you can do there, I'd say follow it. We visited Vancouver, Canada many times, and they have unbelievable areas for people, mass people with mass transportation and stuff. And coming back from Japan, my last statement, it's so safe there. I mean, people can leave their purses out, their luggage out and everything. My son and his family is moving back to the States, to California, and we're constantly reminding them to lock their doors, don't walk on the streets, make sure they watch our 5-year-old grandchild and everything. So the US is really not a safe environment for families. So thank you very much again. Really appreciate it.
Can you confirm the spelling of your name?
Oh, sure. It's,
How do you spell
oh,
Casey?
just Casey, just
Just-
K,
okay.
Letter Casey.
Okay.
Yep.
Is
That's
that
it.
correct?
Yes. You spelled their name right too. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jay Yanamura, Casey's husband. I'm part of the Chinatown Block Watch, and we've both been retired and we travel full time. We spent a month in Germany. We spent the last 3 months in Japan, and like she said, in Vancouver. And everywhere we go, we always say, why can't Seattle be like that? You know, why can't Seattle do the same things? And you guys, it's in your hands to make changes. So talking about the conversion from industrial zones to urban industrial, maybe can you convert it to residential? Look what they did at Point Ruston. We took a Superfund site, F-U-N-D, not F-U-N, and they made a phenomenal waterfront community. Now, when Pier 46 was slated to be a cruise ship terminal and then they walked away, that's an opportunity. Why not take a look at making something like that? Like Point Ruston, put in a phenomenal waterfront residential community that would be, in addition to the gem of Seattle, which will be the Alaskan Way waterfront once it's completed. You walk down out the waterfront, you can see it's going to be the gem of the Northwest. Nothing in Portland will touch it. Now, Vancouver, British Columbia has phenomenal stuff. What they did in Yaletown after the expo, what they're doing in North Vancouver. If you haven't been there, go to North Van and walk along where Pier 70 used to be, or Seven Seas Floating Restaurant. Walk, it is unbelievable. You will say, why can't Seattle do that? And we can. You guys, it's in your hands. You know, have the vision. And they've taken in these areas very polluted, heavily industrial areas and made phenomenal living spaces that people want to go to. They really want to live there. You know, location, location, location. Some of the most underutilized areas in Seattle are just south of Dearborn Street. Talk about, I forget the term, but retail areas, destination retail. One of the #1 retail destination retailers in the world started right there on 4th Avenue. It's called Costco. It's an industrial area. It's a destination retail. Started right there. That's warehouse #1. They can do it. You can bring in others. Right? Well, that's my time. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Jay, do you spell your name Jay?
Yes.
Just to be
Oh,
clear.
yes, that's just.
Just Jay. They're just the one letter people.
Yeah. And we are talking to the city council, so hopefully they take our, word too.
Well, actually, they'd say, no, we can't do anything. You need to go talk to the planning commission.
Yeah.
In my background, I was the security manager of seniors, Starbucks, I was the last landing manager for that building.
And if you have a way to initiate zoning code amendments, that would be excellent. You don't. Okay, then we have to go through this process. So remember our comments, especially when it comes up to the comprehensive plan amendment, because we're going to continue to be back here until it's done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, we are adjourned for those who are online.
Like,